Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Arkham Horror living card game, specifically the Mystic class in the game. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and a cool deck idea and concept for Father Mateo. After this segment of the video, I'm going to display up on the screen a detailed deck construction build for this, so it's just easier for you to take a look at. You can go ahead and pause the video and take a look at the cards, but I'm just going to run through this real quick with you. First up, take the Father Mateo Investigator cards. Next, we're going to have one copy of each of these 6 cards. It's going to be Relic Hunter, Arcane Research, Holy Rosary, St. Hubert's Key, 4 of Cups, Spirit of Fame. For our ally, I chose Alyssa Graham, 2 copies. Combat spells of this deck, 2 copies of Shriveling, 2 copies of Storm of Spirits. For resource generation, Alchemical Transmutation, 2 copies. Our general skill cards in the deck, 2 copies of each of these. Perception, Overpower, and Unexpected Courage. Next up, we are going to have our investigation style spells, 2 copies of Sixth Sense, 2 copies of Rite of Seeking. We're going to round out our spells with 2 copies of Blinding Light, and for our 2 sets of Mystic specific skill cards, 2 copies of Prophecy, and 2 copies of Enraptured. The focus of this deck kind of revolves around the idea of Father Mateo being this eclectic sort of collector of strange objects and artifacts. So kind of when I put this deck together, I did focus on the fact that Father Mateo starts the campaign with 5 experience points. So I kind of looked at what could I do to sort of bring something somewhat unique to the game. And that's when I came up with the idea and the concept of the Relic Hunter, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what that means. So spending 3 of the 5 experience points on Father Mateo allows you to buy the copy of Relic Hunter, which allows you to put 2 accessories onto your character as opposed to the typical 1. So oftentimes when I'm playing Mystic decks, I'll throw in 2 copies of Holy Rosary. It gives you a +1 to your willpower score, which is fantastic for any caster, especially when you're playing the Mystic. Secondarily, St. Hubert's Key is another fantastic item that you can also put on your character as well. This is going to give you +1 willpower and a +1 to investigation. So by having Relic Hunter out, it allows you to have 2 sort of unique items on your character, and that's kind of the focus of this deck. Think of it as Father Mateo has these relics and blessed charms that he's carrying around, and he uses them to buff himself up. What's kind of fun about this deck is there's a lot of single cards. There's a lot of these accessories or tarot cards or special weapons that are placed into the deck. You only have 1 copy of it. So as you're playing through the deck, it's kind of this unique feel as you get these different items out onto the table, and they're all unique. So it kind of has definitely a special feel when you're playing this deck. Continuing this trend, we have 3 other unique items. We're going to spend our last 2 experience points on 1 copy of the 4 of Cups and then 1 on this dagger. So the 4 of Cups is great if it's in your opening hand. You get to put it into play and it gives you a +1 willpower. Once again, Father Mateo is a caster, so having willpower is a fantastic option. Secondarily, we have this knife, and this thing does a multitude of different things. When you're casting spells, you can actually exhaust this card to add +2 the skill value for that test, so that's great. Father Mateo is going to be casting a lot of different spells throughout the course of the game. Secondarily, Father Mateo doesn't have a very good combat/fight skill. He only starts the game with a 2. This dagger is going to increase his fight by +2, but you have to exhaust it. So you can either be casting a spell, and every once in a while you can also use the dagger to fight. Another card in the middle is Arcane Research, and this is going to allow your spell costs as you're playing a campaign to be decreased by 1. The only downside is that you suffer a physical trauma actually from that. I want to add a note on survivability and this deck build idea. First and foremost, Arcane Research is going to give you a mental trauma when you purchase this card. Secondarily, if you put out St. Hubert's Key, you're going to suffer 2 sanity damage. So that's 3 sanity that you're going to have to overcome over the course of the game. For a lot of players, that might be difficult. I think it's a really sort of fun idea. Father Mateo has all these bizarre and strange relics, and to some extent they hurt him a little bit, but they also make him super powerful. So his ability scores are going to be really, really strong, really, really powerful for both the investigate and willpower. So secondarily, Alyssa Graham, she is going to help you soak up some of that sanity sort of damage over the course of the game because she has a 3 sanity. So don't forget to apply some of that damage to her over the course of the game. It will improve your survivability. The second note is that as this deck progresses through a campaign, by use of arcane research, you will be able to buy spells faster and more efficiently, and for cheaper experience point costs. So as you start leveling up, so to speak, in the campaign, you have a lot of cool relics and gear on you already, so focus on upgrading your spells, and you can do it very quickly and very effectively with arcane research. As you start getting those upgrades, your survivability is going to be enhanced dramatically. Having a high willpower allows you to take advantage of alchemical transmutation. This card is going to be your resource generating card for your deck. It's pretty effective the better your willpower. You can get up to 3 resource tokens every time you use this card. On occasion, you're going to take some damage if you pull one of those negative tokens out of the bag. But for the most part, since Father Mateo's willpower is going to be so high right out of the gate, and some of those artifacts that you're going to be putting on him is further going to enhance it. So very, very often you're going to be getting 3 resources out of this card. So I don't think it'd be that crazy to say that you could get 6 or more resources from playing this card down. And that's a fantastic way to pay for some of his more expensive sorts of relics and artifacts that you're putting out onto the table, and some of those expensive spells. The spells in general are a little bit pricey because they have multiple charges on them. It's very similar to a Guardian, let's say, purchasing a firearm, like a 45. So you need these resources to help pay for your spells, and this is a great way to do it. If you're doing your mulligan or opening hand action, this is one of the cards I recommend that people look for. That in conjunction with the tarot card that we already talked about before. These are great cards to have in your opening hand, and it kind of gets your deck moving and your deck primed. A major benefit of playing this deck is that you can collect clues from the scenario locations very, very quickly. The first card that we have in it, there's going to be 2 copies of Rite of Seeking. This is a pretty basic card. You do a skill check, and if you pass that skill check, you can get 2 clues from that location. The next card is Sixth Sense. This does not have any charges on it. You can use it over and over again, and you can remotely investigate an adjacent space. This is kind of a strange idea. It's very, very cool, though. You get to choose which shroud value you use. It could be the location that you're at, or it's the location that you are remotely viewing by using this card. Whatever you select when you're playing, both of these are really strong and great options. One thing that you can do is, let's say you have Rite of Seeking out toward the early portion of the game, and then it runs out. You can always throw Sixth Sense out, and that stays out on the table, or you can do it either way. But to kind of sum it up, this deck collects clues very, very quickly, very, very effectively. When investigating, use the card Enraptured while using an investigation action to basically give you a charge back on Rite of Seeking. So this is a fantastic way to make sure that you're making those investigation checks, and then you're also recharging Rite of Seeking at the same time. So as I said before, this deck collects clues very quickly. This is one way that you can collect them even quicker because you're not failing those skill checks. In addition, you're also giving a charge back to your investigation spell card. So this is a great combo to perform. Every character in Arkham Horror should be able to fight, and Father Mateo is no exception. There's a couple cards that we're going to place into the deck to enhance his fighting abilities. We've already talked about the sort of dagger that you can put into the deck. You can exhaust that dagger to add a +2 to his combat skill while you're doing a fight action. So that will raise him to a 4. That's not going to be something that you're going to rely on all the time. A better use of using that dagger is to buff or alter one of your attack or combat cards your combat spells that you're going to put into the deck. This deck contains 2 copies of Shriveling and 2 copies of Storm of Spirits. Shriveling is the basic card from the original core game. It is the basic bread and butter combat spell for the Mystic. Secondarily, there's sort of an area effect spell that you can use. It's called Storm of Spirits. You can hit multiple things at the same location that you're at. Occasionally, you're going to blow yourself up in the process if you pull one of those negative tokens, but hey, that's the fun of playing the Mystic. So use Shriveling primarily, and then augment it every once in a while by using Storm of Spirits to hit grouped or bunched up enemies. Father Mateo has an agility value of 3. He's not going to evade very often, so that's where the card Blinding Light comes in. There's a couple copies of this in the deck, just for those sort of rare encounters that are too big and powerful to fight off, and you really need to get away. You really need to evade and run away to save your life. Oftentimes, this can make or break a game. So with 2 copies of Blinding Light, this is a great card. You can use your willpower to escape as opposed to your agility score. In addition, you can whittle the enemy down by hitting them for 1 point of damage. Secondarily, the skill card Prophecy is a great way to augment any skill check throughout the course of the game. It seems that I use it often on fight actions and evasion actions. And what's great about this card is that you get 1 wild icon for a skill check, but if there's 3 doom, that rises to 2, and if there are 6 doom or more on the table, that raises to 3. So this card is very, very helpful, very, very versatile. The worse the game gets, essentially, the better this card is. So when you really need to make that skill check, Prophecy comes through and shines through time and time again. For general skill checks for this deck, I put in a couple copies of Overpower. Father Mateo sometimes struggles before getting combat spells out, doing those basic fight actions, so Overpower is a great way to sort of buffer and augment that. Now, what I recommend is that you put in either 2 copies of Perception, which is an investigation skill card, or 2 copies of Manual Dexterity. As we saw before, his evasion is not the greatest. So if you would rather evade maybe 1 or more extra times during the course of the game, if you throw in a couple copies of Manual Dexterity over Perception, that'll help. If you want to focus a little bit more on investigation, throw in 2 copies of Perception. And then the sort of generic wild Unexpected Courage that goes well in almost any deck. To summarize, the Father Mateo deck is an exciting way to experience Arkham Horror Living card game. If you're looking for a deck with a lot of cool and unique asset cards, this is it. There's a lot of one-offs in this deck that when you pull them and you put them on your investigator, it feels really exciting. In addition to that, his ability to collect clues is amazing. This deck is a lot of fun to play. Whether it's a solo player game or even a multiplayer game, I highly recommend it. His fighting ability is fairly average. He can take down decent threats. His evasion is going to be a little bit on the weaker side. So if you're looking for a solid investigation deck that blends sort of like relic collecting with investigation and some decent fighting, this is the deck for you. I want to thank you for spending time with me today, going over some cool tips and tricks for deck building ideas, specifically for the Mystic class, Father Mateo, and Arkham Horror Living card game. I want to thank you for your time again, and as always, have fun gaming.